Limerence by Dev Devlin. Read by Ella Mabella. 9. Miss Granger does not return to his class. Months pass, months go by, and Tom does not speak with her at all, though he has seen her 3 times since the Transfiguration classroom. The first time they had passed in the 2nd-floor corridor. She had been walking side by side with Weasley and Potter between classes, and she'd been laughing at something one of them had said. Her laughs had ceased when she'd spotted him, and then she kept her head down until he was gone. Tom specifically remembered it, because he'd closed his fists so tightly that they'd bled. The 2nd time he saw Miss Granger, she'd been in the library. She was tucked away toward the back in her usual spot, and she hadn't seen him exchanging his pile of books with Madame Pince. He'd wanted to speak to her then. He'd wanted to approach her and yell at her for being such a stubborn, foolish child, but she'd said that cornering her in the library had been harassment, and so he reminded himself that she was nothing, and he left without saying a word. But the last time he'd seen her, the most recent occasion, they'd spoken. It had been awkward, and she had looked uncomfortable, but they'd spoken nonetheless. It had been at the Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Ravenclaw. She'd been climbing up the stairs with Miss Lovegood, and he'd been escorting Crabbe down after issuing him a swift detention for sharing in far too much detail and far too loudly the things he'd like to do if left alone with Gryffindor's chaser, the youngest Weasley. "Professor Riddle!" Lovegood had greeted brightly as they passed. "Luna?" he'd returned. "Hermione." Granger's smile had been forced, but he still remembers it vividly. "Professor?" Miss Granger's skills of avoidance have become impeccable since then, and he wastes more time than he ought to wondering what she's doing for her meals. In the meanwhile, without the distraction of Miss Granger, Tom busies himself with his classes, grading, once again perfecting his image on the perfect professor to shake off Dumbledore's eye. As a consequence, he frequents down to the chamber less and less often. His basilisk is becoming restless, angry even, and at each visit she hisses at him of her frustrations. But to free her again so soon would carry too much risk and would surely result in the closure of the school, so he forbids her to leave the chamber. She's most put out with him, but he has grown used to that this year. Others being put out with him. And though the months pass, his dreams of Miss Granger do not stop. It is most fortunate for Tom when he skips that weekend's Quidditch match and stumbles across an oversized Gryffindor harboring a wild animal in one of the empty dungeon's storage cupboards. A most fortunate chance of luck, but not surprising. Fate has always smiled upon him. The talks of closing the school cease after the culprit for Warren's murder's caught, but Dumbledore's watchful eye does not waver. Tom has always liked the astronomy tower. It has the height of the Owlery with none of the feces. It has the openness of the Quidditch pitch with none of the practicing players. It is a place that none of the students would expect to find a defense against a dark arts professor had they been seeking him, and because of that it is one of his favorite places in the castle. That morning the sun rises over the mountains, the sky reflecting a soft shade of pink. There are thestrals flying over the forest in the distance, and over the castle to the west, parliaments of owls circle, various packages and envelopes clutched between their claws. It is peaceful watching them. "Turning in a student to take the blame for you?" At the breach of serenity he whirls around, and she's there, an angry, poised lioness. Beautiful, beautiful, awful Miss Granger, and he isn't immediately sure if she's another dream or not. "Yes," he says tiredly, not having the energy to argue, and though seeing her, speaking with her, has been all he's wanted over the last few months, he turns back to the view. "Have you no shame? Don't you feel even the slightest bit of remorse for what you've done?" she demands. "You weren't satisfied with taking just one student's life, but now you take 3? He scoffs, but with the wind, he is sure she wouldn't have heard. "Remorse is for the weak," he mutters. She makes a sound, indignant, scandalized, and at once it seems to bury itself in his mind. Another way in which she will torment him later in his dreams, he is sure. "I should tell them," she threatens, and though he isn't looking, he can hear it, how close she is to crying. She's always crying, and it is infuriating. "About you? About everything?" He closes his eyes briefly and then turns to her. "Go on, then," he hisses, and she flinches at his tone. Tell them, and they will watch as you crumble and turn into nothing." She does not respond, and the wind blows her hair back from her face, back far enough to make the red rings under her eyes seem more prominent. But it doesn't deter him. "Will they miss Nortall Miss Granger, the girl with the big nose who once had so much promise, who dropped dead without finishing what seemed to be the most important sentence?" She looks as though he slapped her, and there is a part within him that wishes he had. "I don't think so," he answers himself as he steps closer, and his hands are trembling now. "I think they'll be glad to see the end of you. I know I will." Her features twist, contract with hurt and anger and disgust, and then, just as he thinks she will cry, she spits. His eyes close in reflex, while her saliva meets its mark right on his cheek. When he opens his eyes, he sees her rage. It is disarming. It is so beautiful. "Fuck you!" The moment is gone. Tom wipes her spit from his cheek before it can freeze onto his skin, and then he licks it from his fingers. Many sleepless nights later, after another one which felt that it would be endless, when there is only a month until the end of the school year, Tom thinks about leaving. Everywhere he looks, she is there, horrified, scandalized, distraught Miss Granger, and surely there is not much more that Hogwarts has to offer him. Surely he will be better off out of its restrictive walls, away from Dumbledore's watchful eye, out of the space that she has been. He will take his basilisk with him when he goes, he decides. She will not like to leave her home after so many centuries, but she will not like to sleep again either, so he thinks she can be convinced. Travelling with a basilisk will not be easy, but he is sure he can manage, and he could show her the world. They will find somewhere where she can hunt every night, where neither of them will have to hide, and he will finish what he started when he cursed the Riddles down. Lord Voldemort will rise at long last, and he will excise all memory of Miss Granger. She is nothing, and she will soon be nothing. He thinks about it all morning. He thinks about it throughout his third year Slytherin Gryffindor class, and then he thinks about it through his fourth year Hufflepuff Ravenclaw. He thinks about it during his marking in his free period, and when classes break for lunch, he has decided. He's going to do it. He will write his resignation that very day, that very lunch break, and he will be free. Free from Dumbledore, free from Hogwarts, free from her. When he ventures down from his classroom towards his chambers in the dungeons, he does it in a hurry. He takes the stairs by twos, he squeezes through the congregations of students without pause, and he takes a shortcut across the courtyard towards the stairs by the Great Hall. He makes it halfway across the yard before he abruptly stops. On the other side of the courtyard, his eye has been caught. And like the nightmare he cannot wake from, the fire festering under his skin. She is there. Stubborn, awful, beautiful Miss Granger. The bench she is sitting on is in the sun, and her hair seems to glow. There's a red tinge to it in the light he can see, and it matches the red on her uniform, her freckles, her brown eyes. And then, just as he has taken her in, she laughs. It is light and it is carefree, youthful, and though he has seen her laugh countless times over the years, it seems oddly as if this, now, is the first time he's seen it. It's wild and raw, and at the sound of it, the muscles in his stomach constrict. But it is then, when she laughs, that he finally notices how close she's sitting with Weasley, and his hand is on her thigh. It is not low, not on her knee. It is not in the middle, Not in the way one might grip someone's thigh after they told an exceedingly funny joke. No, Weasley's hand is high enough that his thumb is surely brushing where her thighs and hips meet, and it is high enough that had he spotted Malfoy sitting with a girl in such a way in the open school grounds, he would have deducted points. Tom cannot look, and yet he cannot look away either, and the noises of the courtyard quickly begin to blend together, blend and morph into a loud ring, until Tom cannot hear anything at all, anything but the ringing and the sound of his own breath. She is close enough to Weasley that their legs, their shoulders are brushing, and Tom's already tight collar grows tighter. It grows tighter, tighter, and Weasley is speaking to her now, speaking in low words he cannot hope to guess at, but she is smiling. There are roses under the skin of her cheeks, and they are the same ones that used to bloom for him. Tom can hear himself breathing, but it does not feel like he is. His head is light, and his collar is too tight. Too tight. It makes sense. He knows somewhere that it makes sense. Potter and Weasley have been by her side for years. Of course it makes sense that she's grown close with them. But this... He leaves. Tom wrenches his eyes from them and turns around to head back the way he came, and while he goes, he pulls off his tie. He clenches his fists, both of them tight enough that they are both surely bleeding this time, and he's breathing now through his mouth. He veers off from the corridor into an empty classroom, slamming the door behind him, and he's heaving now, loud and ragged, and his skin is hot. His blood is rippling, prickling, burning, and he cannot fucking breathe. Tom rips at the collar of his shirt, the buttons tearing from the fabric, and he leans his head against the cold stone of the wall. Weasley! Fucking useless! Waste of space! Weasley! He's never liked Weasley, any of the Weasleys for that matter, but this! He shakes his head at the instinctive thought of killing him. You weren't satisfied with taking just one student's life, but now you take 3? She wouldn't like it if he made it 4. She wouldn't like it at all. No. Miss Granger would most vehemently disapprove, but he cannot help it. He cannot help but picture Weasley's head off of his body, his eyes wide and unseeing. Tom's hands come down onto the stone wall harshly, the bones in his palms protesting. He repeats the action again and again until his blood is left on the stone, until he cannot feel his hands anymore, and then, between his ragged breathing, a sudden high-pitched sound. It slips out, high and surprised, and he cannot control it, and he laughs. He laughs and laughs because now suddenly it is all so clear. He hadn't seen it before, but it was right in front of him the entire time. The boy is the problem. He hadn't seen, he hadn't known. Perfect, brilliant, extraordinary Miss Granger. He hadn't even thought that another had seen her the way he had. But stupid, thick, worthless Weasley had, and that was the problem. The boy was the problem, and the boy too was the answer. That day, in the Transfiguration classroom, she'd so very nearly given in to him, but something had held her back. He'd assumed it was herself, her own nature, her stubbornness, her goodness. But he'd been wrong. It hadn't been her at all. It was the boy. His love is manic now, because he has a better idea than leaving Hogwarts, and it is simple. Remove the boy. Remove the boy, and there will be nothing left to stop her. Remove the boy, and his basilisk will be most pleased. Multiple problems. One answer. Tom is there grinning now, and his breathing is beginning to level, his blood beginning to cool. All too suddenly, it seems that Weasley is not quite so worthless after all. To be continued. Thank you for listening to today's chapter of Limerence by Dev Devlin, read by Ella-Max Mabella. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, AO3, Instagram, or Tumblr.